Hey guys, bachphotography here, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about how you can take better photos at night, specifically portraits, and we're going to be looking at a few different types of portraits you can take at night, and some of these require a little bit of equipment, but don't worry, you probably have everything that you need to take these sorts of photos. So if you're new to the channel, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, just so you don't miss out on any content like this in the future, and let's jump right into this photo shoot and see how I took these photos. So there's three ways that I'm going to be showing you to take photos at nighttime. In this video, we're going to be looking at using a long lens and getting some really beautiful blurry backgrounds with a long lens that has a low aperture. Then we're going to look at a different style where you can get a wider sort of shot with something like a 35mm, but you can use anything like a kit lens for this sort of photo shoot. And then finally, we're going to do another type of nighttime photo shoot where we use available light with different colors so that we can get a interesting and more artsy sort of photo shoot at the end. So for this photo shoot, I used a Sony a7R II. I used a few different lenses. I used the Sigma 85mm 1.4 and the Sigma 35mm 1.4, but you don't actually need these lenses in particular. You can pretty much use any lens you like for one of these styles of photos. And then I also used a Yong YN300 constant light, but I'm going to show you a few alternatives that you can use instead of that, something that you probably have at home if you don't have the constant light. But if you are looking to buy a constant light so you can do some photos similar to this, I will also leave a link in the description for a YN300 constant light so you can purchase that off Amazon or just have a look at finding some more information about that light as well. I'm also going to leave in the description a link to all the raw files for this photo shoot and also a link to my Instagram and also Kiara, the model's Instagram here as well, so that you can check those out if you're interested. So when it comes to nighttime photography, the limiting factor you're going to find to getting some really beautiful photos is finding some really nice available light to make your images look more interesting in the background, make them nice and blurry and creamy and have all those beautiful colors of bokeh in the background. But you're also, for portraits in particular, going to want to find a light that you can use to illuminate your subject and get them to pop in the foreground. And one really good way of doing this for nighttime photography is actually getting a constant light or something similar to that, so you can shine that light on your model and really bring them out into the foreground. Now, if you don't have a constant light or you don't want to buy a constant light, you have a few options. You could use something like a torch. Pretty much any torch is fine. Try to find something that has a warm color balance, not too blues. So you can go to any hardware store and get a torch for really cheap, and that would be perfect. If you want to make the light a little bit softer and make it look a little bit more aesthetically pleasing on your model, you can also get a white plastic bag and just put it over the torch, and that will sort of diffuse the light a little bit better and let the light be more flattering on your model. So if you don't want to buy a torch or you can't find a torch, you can actually just use your phone's torch as well. So it's not going to be very bright, so you might want to use your torch and then also your model's phone torch as well, put them together and then use that as a constant light, and that is really going to take your nighttime portraits to the next level, just because that light is really going to make your model pop in the foreground. So when it comes to positioning your light, you're going to want to have it at a 45-degree angle above and to the side of your model, and that is going to add some depth to the image. It's going to make one side of their face more bright and one side of their face more dark, and that's going to make their face look more angular and just more beautiful in general. If you put the light facing forwards, it's going to remove the depth from their facial features, so you're not going to be able to see the curves of their nose and of their cheekbones, things like that. So adding the light to the side at about 45 degrees above and to the side of them is really going to be the most flattering light possible that you can get from your light. So here we have the 85mm f1.4. I'm shooting at the lowest aperture possible here, and you can really see the beautiful blobs of light in the background and how we're really throwing the background completely out of focus and bringing Kiara here into the foreground sharp and making her completely the focus of this image. Now, this is one way that you can get some really beautiful photos at nighttime, because you're really drawing focus to your model, and also as humans we really like the aesthetically pleasing blobs of light in the background. So if you don't have an 85mm 1.4, you can use an 85mm 1.8, or really any long lens with a low aperture will be fine. Now, you can buy an 85mm 1.8 that's manual focus for as little as about $100 brand new, or you can find them for even cheaper if you want to go secondhand. So this is a great option if you're wanting to get some beautiful photos at nighttime, but it's not your only option. The next option we have is actually using a wide angle lens and getting some photos where you can sort of see the background a little bit more, and then your subject is not quite as prominent in the photo as before. And here you can see us using a 35mm lens, and we're still using it at f1.4, but you can see that the background is nowhere near as blurry as with the 85mm. We're also getting a much wider field of view, so you can really get a sense of the background much better than you will with the 85mm, but we're not seeing Kiara in the foreground as prominent as we were before, and she's not as much the focus of the photo as she was before. But because we're still shooting at such a low aperture and we're still getting a really blurry background, we still get a very nice amount of separation between Kiara and the background. So a 35mm is also a great option for nighttime photography, and also as a lens in general, it's a little bit more flexible and versatile, and you can use it for other things like street photography, for events, and other things like that. And just like with the 85mm, you can spend thousands of dollars or more on a 35mm f1.4, but you don't actually have to. You can buy a manual focus 35mm 1.8, something like that, for $100, $150, so it's actually quite a cheap option if you're looking to upgrade from your kit lens and get something a little bit more creamy and something that can shoot nicely in low light and give you some beautiful blurry backgrounds. So now that we've talked about those two ways that you can get nighttime photos when you have a constant light, let's have a look at some of the photos I took from this photo shoot, and then we'll go to the other type of nighttime photos you can take where we use just available light and don't use any equipment in terms of lighting. Okay, I've saved the best to last because in my opinion this is the best way to take photos at night, and also I think this type of photography is my favorite and makes the best resulting images at night time. So now we're going to look at how you can use lighting from something like a gaming arcade or anywhere that really has neon lights to get some really interesting images with some beautiful colors with nighttime photography without using any special equipment or having anything like constant lights or really any lighting equipment whatsoever. And these sorts of photos you can do with any lens. I like to use something like a 35mm or a 50mm, but you can use the kit lens, you can use a 7200, you can pretty much use any lens you have available for these photos. So what you do here is you go to somewhere that's going to be brightly lit with beautiful, colorful lighting, somewhere like a gaming arcade or a bar that has lots of neon lights or something like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use the colorful lights from this area to light up our subject in unusual and interesting ways. So I think there's a few tricks to know about when shooting in an arcade with neon lights like this. The first one is to shoot with the slowest shutter speed you can without getting any shakiness from your camera. So if you're shooting with something like a Sony A7 series, because you have image stabilization inbuilt in your camera, you can shoot as low as something like 1/30th of a second, as long as you let your model know to stay perfectly still so that you can get beautiful crisp images and let as much light in as possible, because these areas are more well lit than you would be outside, but they're still quite dimly lit, which means that you're going to want to have a slow shutter speed to let in as much light as possible, but also while keeping your ISO as low as possible so your images aren't super grainy. The next thing you really want to consider when doing these sorts of photos is try to get your model as close to light as possible, just so you can really take advantage of the colors and of the light as much as possible to keep your ISO as low as possible and also your shutter speed as high as you can while still getting a nice exposure in your camera. Having a low aperture prime lens for this sort of photo shoot is going to be really handy. So if you have something with an aperture of f1.8 or lower, it's going to be really handy because you're going to be able to shoot a much lower ISO, which means you're going to have to do a lot less post-production, getting rid of all the noise that's in your image. It also means that all of the colorful arcade neon lights are going to be more blurry in the background, and that's just going to be more aesthetically pleasing as well. So if you do have a low aperture prime lens, now is definitely the time to use it. So before you actually go into an area like this to shoot, just make sure that the management are okay with you shooting. Normally they're super friendly and okay with you going in there, taking a few photos, particularly if you're going to buy a drink beforehand or something like that. So just double check that you're allowed to shoot where you're shooting right now, just so you don't get into any trouble or anything like that as well. So now that we've had a look at all of these different ways to shoot nighttime photography, I'm just going to choose one image and we're going to go through a editing in Photoshop, and you can see how I edit my photos to get them to look like they do here. And if you've got this far into the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content so far. And now that we're going to go into Photoshop, make sure to check out the raw file in the description so that you can edit along if you'd like to edit with me. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop in Camera Raw, and thanks to everyone who goes on Instagram and sends me their edited photos of these photos as well. I really appreciate all of the edits that you guys do. So here we are just adding some exposure and some clarity to the entire image, and that really just adds a whole bunch of mid-tone contrast. When you're doing these sorts of neon photos, one of the things you want to spend a lot of time on is just getting the color balance perfect, because you are going to get some weird colors from the neon lights that might not be the most flattering colors for the image. So I like to try to get the skin tone as close as I can, and then I fill in the other colors afterwards. So I'm just changing the color balance until the skin looks about right. Then I'm going to add and remove some blacks and shadows and contrast and that sort of thing. And then once I've got all of those about right, I go into each individual color slider and just change all the colors saturation until I have the colors that I like the look of. So just take your time with this, get the appropriate colors, and then once you're happy with that, go into the color channel and just get all the colors to be nice and strong, the ones that you like, and then probably not changing the orange one, because the orange color is going to be the skin tone. So here I'm just individually going through each color, sliding it around a little bit and seeing what colors I like the look of. And then the next step will be just removing any blemishes and also removing some of the marks in the skin. Okay, so the next step, we're just going to get a brush again, and then we're going to be making a masking tool with this brush. But before we do that, we're just going to make the eyes a little bit less blue, just so they stand out a little bit more from the image. Because we're getting so many different colors here, when you do a change of all the colors, you might get some unusual colors in unusual areas. So just getting a brush and removing any of the colors you don't like can make a big difference. And I find with the eyes, if you can make them just a little bit more white, they really do pop out from the scene. But just make sure not to change the eyes too much, or they're going to start looking unnatural. So the next step here, we're just getting a brush and we're boosting the exposures and blacks and shadows all the way down, just so we can see where exactly we're brushing. So we're kind of using it as a masking tool. Now you do actually have a masking tool in Camera Raw, but I just do it this way because I find it to be a little bit quicker. So once we have highlighted all the areas of the skin we want to make a little bit smoother, we're going to remove the blacks, shadows and exposure changes that we just made, and then just remove a little bit of clarity from the image, just to remove any contrasting blemishes and smooth the skin in a really quick first pass. Now this is a really rough way of doing it. You can just go into native Photoshop and do things like patch tool and frequency separation, but in the interest of time, this is a quick way that you can remove any blemishes in skin. So the next thing we're doing here is just adding a little bit more clarity to the hair, just to make it a little bit more shiny and pop from the image. Just make sure you don't go too crazy with clarity, because it can make things look a little bit cartoonish. But just adding a little bit more can really make parts of the image pop. Okay, so now let's go into Camera Raw, and here we're just going to remove any little blemishes that we can see on Kara's skin. Because we added a lot of clarity to this image, it makes the blemishes look a lot more pronounced. So just going through the skin, spending 5 minutes with the patch tool really makes a big difference. So there's not really that many blemishes here, but every little thing helps when you're editing a portrait. So just moving any minor imperfections or anything that you can see stand out really does make a huge difference. So what we did there is we clicked Filter, Noise, Despeckle, and as you can see here, that's before, and then this is after. Really just smooths out the entire skin. Because we were shooting at ISO 320 and we did boost the exposure a lot, we did introduce a little bit of noise into the image. And we probably could have shot a little bit of a lower shutter speed, maybe something around 1/80th of a second, and then we could have got the ISO down to Sony's native ISO, which is 100, but shooting at 320 was fine for this particular instance. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to select Kiara here with the select tool, and then we're going to click select inverse, and we're just going to get an inverse selection, so everything apart from her in the scene. Now we're just going to add a little bit of blur, just 1 pixel of blur, just so that she stands out even more in this image. So we're almost there, we've almost finished this image now. I'm just going to get the sharpening tool and sharpen up the eyebrows and eyelashes slightly. And then we're also going to do the lips as well, because with portraits, the eyes and the lips are what should be in focus, because that is what people look at when they're looking at people day to day. So having those in focus is the most aesthetically pleasing thing to have in focus in a portrait. And particularly when you're shooting at such a low aperture, it can be quite difficult to get these parts in focus. But with a bit of practice, you can get the eyes in focus and make everything else blur away into the background. So just going to touch up the lips here as well, just to make them pop a little bit more from the image. And just these little subtle changes make a big difference once you do all of them and put them all together. So that's everything for this photo. I really hope you like it. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you got to the end, and let me know what you thought of this photo. And I'm looking forward to all of the photos that you edit from this photo shoot as well on Instagram. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.